Well, I am so excited to teach today. I get to teach math and science, by day, but teaching the Word of God, it's just my favorite. So we are in the book of 1 John, chapter 4, and hopefully you can kind of shortcut your way there by now, since this is our fourth week in the book of 1 John. But it's at the end of the Bible, almost to the very end. Back up, Revelation, Jude, 3 John, 2 John, 1 John. Okay. So, chapter 4. Let's pray. Lord, speak to us tonight. We are ready to hear and obey. Amen. Oh, before we start, does anyone need a Bible? Because someone might be able to get paper Bibles. You all got an app? Okay, we're all good. Okay. So, tonight, I'm going to ask for a little more response than you guys are probably used to. And it's just take a breath. It's going to be okay. But I just wanted to know, since we've been in the book of 1 John for a few weeks now, and we read through the whole thing together, and maybe you haven't been here, but maybe you've read it before. I just want to know, what is a theme or something we've learned out of 1 John? Shout it out. What's something we've learned from 1 John? Yes. God is light. God is love. John is a fast runner. Yes. Abide in him. What's our family? Believers. Yeah, believers are family, and therefore we should do what? Love them. Yeah, we got to love them. All right, so here we are. Look around the room. These are the people we're going to love. I wanted to go back, since Joey spoke in chapter 3 last week, and his main point as he was going through was we need to love God, keep his commandments. Love God, keep his commandments. Love God, keep his commandments. And he kind of talked about, what does love look like? If we love God, if God is love and his love abides in us, what does that look like? Well, it looks like 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious. Love does not keep a record of wrongs. Love is not puffed up. And he kind of had a little exercise for us that we could put our name in there and see, is that true of us? Are we walking in love? It was like a little check, self-check. Am I walking in love? Am I patient? Am I being kind? Am I not puffed up? Am I keeping no record of wrongs? And that was just a good little self-test to see how am I doing as we're walking in love. And we're going to see some of those ideas again as we go through the book, chapter 4. And I just wanted to back up a little bit because the last verse of chapter 3 ties into what we're going to be talking about. So now if you're in the app, you got to click back. But if you're in the Bible, you could just look up. A little easier if you have the paper Bible. 1 John 3:24 says, now he who keeps his commandments, love God, keep his commandments, abides in him, and he in him, and by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. How do we know we abide? This is that big, that you may know. How do we know we abide? We have the Spirit in us. His Spirit, God's Spirit, is in us. And as we go into the next part, we see in verse 1, he's exhorting each of us as he's talking to these new believers, and as I'm going to read it to you. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming and is now already in the world. We're not to believe everything we hear. We need to test to see, is this of God? And there are prophets. A prophet is someone who shares God's word to the people. And there are false prophets, people who have a word to share that is not from God to share to the people. John was writing this probably around 70 AD. the spirit of the Antichrist, which is now already there. The spirit of Antichrist is any spirit that is anti-Christ or against Christ. Anything that is against what God would have us to do is that spirit of Antichrist. And we all know what false teaching looks like. Now more than ever, it's so easy to click on YouTube and just see something. You're like, that is not true. You're looking at something and you just know it's false. And so when we are hearing something that we, either from up here, if I'm saying something to you, you're like, I don't know if that's true. Look in the Word. Check it out. It should align with what God's Word says. And Deuteronomy 18:20-22 talks specifically about a false prophet, someone who's coming and saying, I have a word from the Lord, and then they share something, and this is what it says in Deuteronomy 18:20. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. If you say in your heart, how will we know the word which the Lord has spoken? How do I know it's from God or not? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if that thing does not happen or not come to pass, that is the thing the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. So my first point is, not everything you hear is from God. Not everything's from God. If someone is saying, this is the word of the Lord for you, or this is what God has said, and it doesn't come true, we know that that's not from God because God's words always come true. The other thing that stuck out to me about that verse is that it says, you shall not be afraid. If someone is coming and they're not from God and they're telling you to do something, you don't have to be afraid of not doing that because it's not from God. So we don't even need to worry about it. Now, if God comes and tells us to do something, as we've been saying, we need to obey God, right? Love him, keep his commandments. We need to do that. But not everything we hear is from God. And so we need to make that, we need to have discerning eyes. We need to be able to make that judgment call. And you might have heard someone say like, oh, you shouldn't judge. Christians are supposed to be loving. And absolutely, we should not be going around judging who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. That's God's job. But we should be judging, is the thing we're hearing true or not? We should be judging, is this from God's word? Is that something that I can find in his word or not? And the great thing about what some of the tools we have today is if you are like, I'm not sure if that's in the word, I think that was a verse, you can search it up. And, you know, we don't have to just read, definitely read the whole word. Read through it. There's an app, it'll read it to you. You don't even have to flip the pages. Read the whole word, know what it says, so that we know what the truth is, so that we know what is from God. And as Joey mentioned last week, some people might say, well, if you love me, then you'll affirm or agree everything that I'm saying, everything that I'm doing. And that's not really what love is. We know we know what love is because God has shown us that love. And when Jesus came on the earth, he didn't agree with what everyone was doing. He didn't say, yes, keep on sinning. He said the opposite. Stop sinning. Go and sin no more. But he loved really well. In fact, he loved to the point that he died on the cross. He loved to the point that he carried that price. And we're going to talk about that in the next few verses. Let's look at verse 7 through 11 in 1 John 4. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. In this the love of God was manifested toward us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. And this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. I want to unpack 3 big words that are in this passage. And I love learning a new word and then being able to use it. So, first word is manifest. Manifest means to make known, to uncover something previously hidden. So if I have something behind my hand and I say, I'm going to manifest it to you, and then I'm going to show you what it was. It's the announcements. But it's not, manifest is to uncover something, to reveal something. So when it's, in this the love of God was manifested toward us, it's not that God loved more or that his love wasn't there. It's just that we couldn't see it. It was hidden. We didn't realize the depths of his love. We didn't understand how much he loved. And then this is how God showed that to us. This is how God uncovered that for us, that he sent his son into the world. Only begotten. He sent his only begotten son. So only begotten just means only born, like an only child. Now, Jesus is not God's only child. And the only reason for that is because we are all adopted into his family. But he's his only begotten child. He's the only one that was born God's child. The rest of us were born into sin nature, and we had to be adopted into his family. But the amazing thing about being adopted into his family is that it says we are now heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, so that we are getting all the same benefits that Jesus gets as God's son. As Jesus was walking around the earth, he had the Spirit to guide him. He had God's wisdom. He had God's ability to speak and pray for people and to see God work. And we have that same gift as we walk around on the earth. We have that same Spirit in us. So only begotten, Jesus is God's only begotten son. The rest of us are all adopted into the family. Propitiation. That's not one you really hear anywhere else. Propitiation, as I would explain it, is a covering to allow God's mercy. So manifest is an uncovering, and propitiation is a covering. It's a payment. But it's something that allows God's mercy to happen. Like a hard hat allows entrance into a construction zone, or maybe a clean suit, hazmat suit, allows entrance into a clean room because you need that thing to enter the room. And just imagine there's a child outside playing in the mud, and they're having a blast, and they're digging in the mud, and they're playing, and they're smearing it, and they're sliding in it, and they're covered in mud up to here. And they come up to the door of the house, and they're like, I want to come in. And the mom's like, and she looks around the house, and she's got a white carpet and a white couch and white curtains. And the kid's like, and if that kid came into the White House, it would no longer be a White House. There cannot be a muddy child like that coming into a White House and it to remain a White House. But if that mom said, hey, wait a minute, take these boots, step into those. Okay, now take these snow pants, put those on. Okay, take this jacket, put these gloves on, plastic gloves, put this hat on. That covering would allow that child to come in the house and to keep that mud from staining all of the white things. And that's what propitiation is. We in no way, we are covered in sin. And we could try our very best to scrape off that mud. And it doesn't matter how much that kid would scrape, and they could try to soak himself with a hose. It's only gonna make it worse in some ways. They're coming up there like, I have less mud, I cleaned myself. And the mom's like, no, it's wet mud. That's even worse. We could try to cleanse ourselves of our sin. We could take some off. We could try to make our lives a little bit better, but we're still not holy enough to come into God's presence, not by a long shot. And propitiation is those galoshes, that covering that allows us to walk into God's presence. And what's amazing is that Jesus provided that. And when we put it on, we're putting on his righteousness. And when we have that on, just like the child is now completely clean and can enter the house, we put on God's righteousness and we become, his righteousness becomes ours. And we can walk into God's presence completely holy, which is the most amazing gift. So now that we've unpacked those words, let's read verses 9 through 11 again. In this, the love of God was manifested toward us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. If God so loved us this way, guys, we also ought to love one another. So, my first point was not everything we hear is from God. My second point is we know who's of God by the way they love. We know who is of God by the way they love. We know who God's children are because we can see the way they love, like Jesus did, laying down his life, laying down the need to be right, laying down the need to get my way, to go the extra mile. And I'm free to do that, to choose that because of the love God has given me. And this is probably the most impactful thing that we can do as we go about our days in the world. And this is why, looking at verse 12, no one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love has been perfected in us. And by this we know that we abide in him and he in us, because he's given us of his Spirit. It's coming back. It's repeated, it's important. This we know we abide in him because he's given us his Spirit. And we have seen and testify the Father has sent the Son as Savior of the world. We can't see God, but we can see his love. We can see his children, his adopted children, that's us, in the world, loving other people, loving each other. Recently, I was at a math conference, and I think Joey mentioned that, but I was at a math conference, and I was there to learn strategies on how to teach math and how to help junior hires understand math better and make it more interesting and make it stick in their brains. That's why I was there. And it was really good. I got a lot out of it. I had a great time connecting with my coworker. I got some good math strategies. And that Saturday evening, we were all just hanging out. There was like a little social mixer. And I got into this conversation with this other woman named Emily. And we just started talking, she was talking about faith and what she believed, and she said, well, she was an agnostic, and so then I shared what I believed, and that I believed I believed in God and that I followed him with my life. And she said, oh, well, I'm a big fan of Jesus, but not of God. And so I said, well, Jesus said himself, I and the Father are one. So, if you could be a fan of Jesus, but he's God too. And so then I just started kind of explaining a little bit about how God, she said, well, in the Old Testament, he's so scary. And in the New Testament, he's much more compassionate. That's the kind of God I want. I said, well, it's different when you have little toddlers. You treat them differently than when you have teenagers. Maybe when they're little, right, you give them, spankings, but then when they're older, they just have time out in their room. But your standards haven't changed. Just the way you interact with them has changed because they've changed. They've grown up. And she was like, oh, I never thought of that way. And so then I just got to be able to share more of how much God loved me and how much he loves her and how much he has just changed my life. And I got to be able to share this with her. And she was saying that she had only really seen the church through her mom's lens. And her mom had been hurt in some way. She didn't say how, but her mom had been hurt by the church. And so when her mom talked to her about church, it was always negative. And that was how she had seen God, was through the lens of her mom's pain. And that was her experience with God. That was how she had seen God in the world. That was her only one. And I got to share with her how my church has a community where people support each other and we're there for each other. And we have this love for each other and that not all churches are like her mom's church. And I was able to share with her the love that we have. And at the end, she said, well, you know what? I think I might talk to my dad because his faith is more room for questions, and I think I might go talk to him, and I might go to church with him. And she was willing to go give God another chance because she was able to see the love that God had through a different perspective. And this is the opportunity we have to show the love of God to the world who may not have seen him through any other lens. Maybe they only have seen him through one lens or a couple of them, and they don't have an idea of who God is. But this is our opportunity as we go through our work, as we go through our school, as we're out in the world talking to the person giving us coffee, or at Trader Joe's, they're always like, so what are you up to today? And I always try to take the opportunity, if it's true, to say, oh, I'm going to church, or I just came from a women's retreat, and it was amazing. This is what God taught me. And be that opportunity to show the love of God in the world, because we will know who's of God by the way that they are loving. And we show the world who God is by the way we abide. Abide can mean live. It can mean dwell. It can also mean remain, like just don't leave. Stick it out. Endure. And verse 13 of chapter 4, here's the another that you may know. This is how we know that we abide in him. We have his Spirit. This is so amazing to me. It's not just that we abide in him. We were talking about that. Nathan mentioned that from John 15. You know, we got to abide in the vine. And if we prune the branches, right, then, you can prune the branches and they can sit there for a little bit. And for a few days, it looks like they're bearing fruit, but they're not going to produce any more fruit. They're not connected to the source. And we talked about how important it is to abide, just, stick with God. But the amazing thing is that it's not just that we stick with God, but he sticks with us. When we abide in him, he puts his Spirit in us. It's almost just like we just have to remain. Just don't leave. And then he gives us, he's the source of all that connection, all that goodness, all that fruit is from him. Just like the tabernacle in the Old Testament, where they could see the presence of God was with them. And God said, don't leave. Don't go on a path. When you see me moving, you're going to go with me. And when you see me stopping, you're going to stop with me. And it's the same for us, except that we don't have a cloud, but we have the Spirit in us. And we can listen to what God has for us. We have his word showing us. We have the example of Jesus showing us what it looks like to be a human and live in the world. So, we know we are abiding because we have a Spirit, and we know we are abiding because we produce much fruit. Galatians 5:16-25 says, I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary to each other. So you do not do the things you wish, but if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I told you beforehand, just as I told you in time past, that these who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. And Joey talked about this distinction last week. There's a difference between slipping up and sinning and, I should not have said that. I had an outburst and I was angry and I said it and I shouldn't have. And knowing I'm wrong and going and repenting and moving on. We all sin. There's none of us that can escape slipping up sometimes. But this is specifically talking about those who practice such things. Those who go around saying, yeah, I'm such a wrathful person. I'm always enraged. They call me the Hulk. That's that becoming who you are. That's the kind of person he's saying that, like, you can't be that person and be God's child, because that's not who God is. Just like the muddy child saying, yeah, I live in a white house. I'm like, do you though? Because your house can't be that white when you're that muddy. But the fruit of the Spirit, when we abide in him, we know we abide in him because the Spirit's in us. And when his Spirit's in us, it produces much fruit because we're connected to the source. Verse 22 of Galatians 5 says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. And those who are Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Interesting contrast. The works of the flesh are evident, and there are laws against some of those things. Maybe not all of them, but definitely people who are going around having outbursts of wrath, who are murdering, right? They're going to break the law at some point. There's laws against some of those things. But the fruit of the Spirit, there's no law against being patient, waiting it out. There's no law against being faithful. There's no law against self-control. You don't need to worry that you're going to maybe break the law if you're walking in the Spirit. And there's the other key verse in this part, verse 24. Those who are Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. We all struggle with those works of the flesh because, like I said, we are not God's begotten children. We are born into sin. We are born into that nature. So we struggle with wanting to go back to our old nature. And maybe, this isn't a comprehensive list, but maybe it's not so much, the murders and the drunkenness that you struggle with. Maybe it's dissension and contention. Maybe it's not the adultery and fornication you struggle with, but the hatred. And they're all sin. They're all keeping us from God. And they're all things that we might slip up in, but they're all things we can repent of and put on that clean suit, put on the propitiation, that covering, and come into the presence of God. No, all of it is mud, and none of it is too much mud to keep us from Christ, to keep us from God when we have that Christ's propitiation covering us. So my first point from the first section was not everything you hear is from God. Secondly, we know who is of God by the way they love. Third, we show the world who God is by the way we abide. And number 4, we can know for sure. Verses 15 through 19. Whoever confesses Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him and he in God. And we have known and believed the love God has for us. God is love. And he who abides in love abides in God and God in him. Love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. We love him because he first loves us. So whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him. So we've been talking about this. How do I know I abide? How do I know I'm God's child? Well, confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus was God's only begotten Son who came into the world to pay the price, to be that propitiation so that he would make a way for us to have a relationship with him. And if you confess that and believe it, you're his child. You're his. And once we are his child, then it says we have no fear in love. We're not afraid of that judgment day. There is a day when Jesus comes back to the world and we have to face the judgment seat of God. We have to face God, and we are going to be held accountable for the things that we've done. And we'll be called up. And if we have that propitiation on, we've put that on, that righteousness from Jesus, God looks at us and goes, well, you're righteous. Come on in. And that's the amazing thing. That's why we don't have to fear, because we have that righteousness from God, from Jesus on us. Because we'll know him and we'll be known by him. And if you're wondering what do we know, sneak peek to next chapter. Verse 13, these things I've written to you who believe, that you may know that you have eternal life. So, not everything's from God, but we'll know who is because of how they love. We show the world who God is. and we can know for sure. So let's pray. God, I just pray that you would give to each one tonight the spirit of wisdom and revelation and the knowledge of you, that their eyes would be enlightened, that they would understand who you are, that they would know what's the hope of your calling, what's the riches of your glory for the inheritance that you have for us, what's the exceeding greatness of your power toward us who believe, according to the working of your mighty power. We obey, we love, we know we're yours. Thank you, God. Amen.